Refutation is going to be on human genetic engineering, and I'm not going to mention the person's name, but I'll refer to him as my opponent. Okay. So the claim that I'm going to be responding to is genetic engineering on humans would have an overall negative impact on society. The two secondary claims that my opponent made were: first, advancements in genetic engineering would lead to designer babies. And second, the advent of designer babies would lead to artificial discrimination and quote-unquote elitism. So first of all, I want to challenge one of the definitions that he made, which were designer babies. He defined designer babies as an offspring whose genes has been selected prior to their birth. Designer babies are a product of genetic engineering, and the term derived from designer clothing. And so I looked on dictionary.com and found out that what dictionary.com defines as designer babies are quote-unquote the mention of embryo with particular lacking genes or particular undesirable genes was not mentioned. This causes the designer's babies to appear as more of an aesthetic than a medical tool that may be necessary. So when he discussed the designer's baby as something that would make babies look prettier, or something that would fix the little traits like eye color or their muscle growth, it sounded more of an aesthetic than a necessity. And so I'm going to continue on my speech by a couple responses to his claims, including one, designer babies are highly theoretical, but if able, genetic engineering and quote-unquote designer babies have the potential to eliminate natural issues in humans, including many diseases. And my second response to his claim would be the small traits that are applied to designer babies are not significant enough to cause quote-unquote discrimination and elitism. So for my first response to his claim, he quoted that the designer babies, the advancement in genetic engineering would lead to designer babies. And the website that he used was www.nexture.com, and the part that he used was talking about how designer babies would improve the looks of babies and how people would prefer their babies to look like. And in their closing statements, this was a quote that was written on the website. It says, "In fact, such technology may be impossible, considering that most traits are complex and involve numerous genes. This causes the whole argument to be less of an issue and a question of if it's even worth discussing because of its legitimacy." The opponent effectively explains the process of genetic engineering, but fails to discuss his personal position on the issue. So as he explained his first secondary claim, he talked about how the process works, how the baby's traits are chosen, but he didn't really explain which position that he decided to take on. There are many benefits of designer babies that the opponent chooses to exclude. Actually, Raymond Ballin, a doctor at Discovery Institute Center for Science and Culture, stated the primary use for human genetic engineering concerns the curing of genetic diseases. These genetic diseases includes Down syndrome, which is when an individual has 3 copies of the chromosome 21, and Alzheimer's disease, which is a genetic disease of the brain. And so my second response to his claim is the small traits that are applied to designer babies are not significant enough to cause quote-unquote discrimination and elitism. The opponent discusses that designer babies would have the advantage of prettier traits, yet there are no really real set standards for prettier. So everyone has their own definition of what is prettier or what is not. So that is a very broad point that he made that wasn't really clear. The opponent claims that the process of genetic engineering is costly. The costliness of the process would limit the amount of people who participate in this procedure, and it wouldn't have the hypothesized results of discrimination and elitism. So because of the cost of the process, not a lot of people would do it, and therefore there wouldn't be an issue of elitism or discrimination. And to my last point, the chances of an event like the opponent mentions, he compares the two, Hitler's Aryan race to designer babies, as one day they might become perfect enough to eliminate those who aren't perfect. But back to my previous point where everybody has their different standards of what is pretty and what is not. So it's a very sci-fi kind of like topic that it's really not likely to happen. So, yeah.
All right, Aaron, you identify the topic pretty clearly. There's a good label of the advocate's claim and the secondary points. And then you kind of preview the arguments that you're going to make on those individual points. I'm not sure that you need to go that far because it's like a second preview that we're going through. It might be simpler to just have a simple claim that you're going to say on each of those points and then wait and give us more detail when you get to those particular points. I think that would be a little clearer. The challenge to the definition is okay, but I think the reason that you are making the challenge ultimately is the notion that the advocate thinks designer is really referring to aesthetic issues when in fact when people are engaged in genetic engineering research, especially human genetics, they're more concerned with the other. And I think that's the claim that you want to be making there. And the definitional way of approaching it is okay, but you've really got a good counterclaim here, and I think that what you need is a little bit of evidence that shows that that's in fact what geneticists are doing, that they're working on. They don't give a damn about giving people blue eyes or making them 6'2" or making them right-handed or any of those kinds of things. What are they spending all their time doing? They're looking at the genetic causes of diseases. They're looking at problems that people have with their brain or with developmental issues, and that's where all of the research money is going, all the energy is going, and a little bit of information like that I think would make that argument stronger. I think you've got a reasonable point that you're making there, but you could use a little bit of evidence on that particular point. I did like the fact that on the second point, you basically use the advocate's own information it's right at before the second point. You use the advocate's own source to suggest that this is really speculative in the first place. It's unlikely that that's going to happen. So in other words, the evidence that the advocate uses suggests that this is, a really small issue for us to be worrying about to begin with, so I'm not sure that it's worth arguing about. I thought that was a very effective way to address that issue. The question about standard of what's prettier and all that kind of thing, I think that's kind of a broad challenge on that issue. It's okay. I think you're probably safer with the earlier argument, which is that it's unlikely to happen. I did think that the cost argument applied here pretty effectively. Look, if this is going to be really expensive, then the likelihood that it's going to be frequent and therefore create a separate class of human beings is relatively low. And the truth, and then I think go back to your original argument when it says, and the thing that they're most likely to be spending their money on is trying to prevent, a disease that runs in their family rather than making sure that their kids have blue eyes or something along those lines. So I like the way you closed out too. It's a sci-fi speculative kind of thing that might be great in a movie, but it doesn't really make much sense in the real world where people are spending their careers researching diseases and fixing human problems and not worrying about whether or not your hair lays flat, and that kind of thing. All right.